about strategies of using stories to increase learning and facilitate training. These are the times when we're in front of a group and all of the different ways that we can use stories to be effective in creating a very dynamic learning environment. Today's webinar is being sponsored by JD Messenger and the Essence Exchange Network. Thanks to all the folks out there for providing the technology and the sponsorship for this event. This is a recorded session, so there will be no live questions. However, upon reviewing this, please do send me emails at Terrence, T-E-R-R-E-N-C-E, at makingstories.net. Better yet, give me a call. So here's what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes. We're going to start by asking, what does it take to be effective in front of a group when we're working with stories? What's at the heart of story work with groups? So we'll start there, and we're going to look at some foundational principles. These are going to form the 7 strategies. So we'll start with this foundation of what we need to be aware of. What does it take to be effective? What's at the heart of being effective with a group with stories? And then we'll walk through 7 different strategies. Then for questions and answers, I will leave about 4 minutes at the end of the presentation where I have some frequently asked questions. These are questions that I've received in the past when I've talked to groups about this very topic. And so when we're in front of a group, and it could be any kind of training. It could be technical training. It could be soft skills. It could be more like a facilitated session. Perhaps it's even a meeting. What's at the heart of really being effective, and what's at the heart if we're going to work with stories? Not just tell stories, but actually get the group to use stories as a way of tapping into their experiences and sharing with one another. Well, the first thing that I think of for myself is I have to be focused on them. It's all about them and very little about me. And I also have to be willing, just like this picture of someone holding a heart in their hand, I have to come in prepared to give of myself. I have to come in and be willing to model the same vulnerability while still maintaining credibility with the group. So there's a lot of care and intention that goes into working with stories. It's opening up a space that says, I really do want to hear your experiences. Your experiences are critical to not only your learning process, but the group's learning process, and they're important to me as an individual, as the leader of this group. So how do I attend to this? If being tuned into the group, forgetting myself is important, what am I paying attention to during a training event? And that boils down to 3 areas of information that as a facilitator I am attending to during a learning event. And the first is the content. These are the words that people are sharing. These are all of the things that they're saying. Then there's the emotion. What's between those words? What else is coming out? What feelings are people expressing? And stories, of course, are a wonderful way to get at emotion. They are a wonderful place where people relive their experiences in ways beyond just the content and the words, but in ways that are deeply personal to themselves and in personal ways that can be shared with others. So I have to attend to that emotional information. And then lastly, I need to be attentive and attuned to what I believe is the intent. What are the intents? What are the purposes of each individual in that room? And where are they coming from? So as I put out myself to be vulnerable, at the heart of working with stories is care and intention. And these then are 3 very concrete things that I have to attend to as a facilitator in order to know how to work with stories and what stories to share and what stories to get from the group. That leads us to the notion that every person in the group, the heart of the group is the individuals, not the leader. The heart of the group are all of these very individual stories. Every person is a gem. Every person has a wealth of stories to bring together. And it's all these separate stories that come together that create the heart of the group, the heart of its learning, the heart of its insights. So as we're looking at this animation of bits and pieces flying around, those are the bits and pieces of all the people in your learning event. They're all having different experiences. They all have had different experiences, and they all are having emotions. And your job is to somehow coalesce and bring that together into a fabric, into a heart where people are able to exchange and meaningfully learn from each other. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I measure the success of my events by the number of questions. And it's not just the questions being asked, it's the questions that are in people's eyes as I look around the room. Questions tell us that people are reflecting. And if people are reflecting, it's touching their imaginations. And it's here in the place of imaginations, which is where stories work so well, that real change is possible. Real insights, epiphanies, and behaviors that are new become tangible. So what do I do with these questions? And I'll share one brief quote from Rainer Maria Rilke, who is a German poet, and he was writing to a younger poet who was just starting his career. And the Rilke says, you need to live your questions. It's from your questions that the depth of your knowledge, your insights. So that's what we want to be happening in our room. Okay, so we're in this room, and now we have all of these questions. We're stirring the pot. How do we handle them? What direction do we go in? Well, we can give people information. We can point people to information. We can refer to our course materials. We can take a parking lot because perhaps the question is tangential and is not one that we can deal with at the time. However, I think the most powerful thing that we can do with people's questions often is answer with a story. So when we stand in front of the group and we take in someone's question and we respond with a story, what that does is it starts to incite in each person their own experiences. It helps them to create a virtual reality simulation of what concepts and ideas are being discussed, and it helps to create this puzzle of people drawing and connecting together to learn from each other. So an example might be if a question about change in a merger or acquisition, my response might be, if someone asks me, well, what are 3 things that I can do to be more effective? I'll actually come out and share a story about what it was like to be in a change situation. Well, that leads us to strategy number 2, elicit stories from the group. You don't have to always be the person with the story to tell. In fact, it's far more powerful when you can get others to tell their stories. So here are these folks standing on their puzzle pieces, and each one of them has a piece of the puzzle. Each one of them has their experiences, and those experiences are being expressed as stories. And you're reaching out trying to get each one of them to share. When you do that, you end up with this great fabric. Notice in this picture that has just come up on your screen, there really isn't any leader here. In fact, the group now is interfacing with each other through sharing their stories. So your job is to elicit as many stories from the group. The only reason sometimes for you to tell a story is to get things started and for you to model and to create an environment of trust where others are willing to share their stories. Those stories then become the interfacing point at which these puzzle pieces all get connected for some powerful learning. Strategy number 3, use a metaphor or analogy. I love this little fishbowl. I often feel like I'm like this fish in the fishbowl. I don't know about you, but often I get trapped in just talking about the content that's relevant to this training material. I forget that I can swim out of that bowl like our fish friend. So try not to get trapped. When you're looking for ways to explain ideas and concepts and to work with people's emotions and experiences, remember to work with material, metaphors, and analogies that are outside of your topic area. That makes for a far more richer opportunity for people to learn. So I like this cat and I like this mouse. And this is exactly the point of working outside of the domain. In fact, Roger Schenck talks about intelligence being the ability to relate something from one domain in a totally new domain. So what your job as a facilitator is to be rich and evocative in the language and the examples, and the stories, metaphors, and analogies are types of stories that you use to make for a very dynamic learning environment. Strategy number 4, tell a story to change the group's energy. I can't think of a better way. Music is another way to move the energy of a group, but stories told at the right time can really take a group either down to a point of calmness and reflection, or it can take it and give a group rest or energy. Just like an intense movie, you need some comic relief. Well, learning events are the same way. Sometimes we need comic relief. Sometimes we actually need thoughtful relief. Sometimes we're just draining people with so much information. We haven't given them the space and the time to be reflective, and stories are a great way of slowing things down when those words, once upon a time, and you don't literally have to use those words, but when a story is told, people do shift into a very different state of consciousness, a very different frame of reference. Strategy number 5, validate and transform emotions with a story. In a group, you've got so many different feelings going on, and oftentimes, if we're just attending to the content from that earlier slide, we're missing all of the emotions. What a story does is it allows us to demonstrate that we are on the same frequency. By sharing stories and eliciting stories from the group, we're able to open up, just like this hibiscus flower, we're able to get people to open up into a space of trust, into a space of sharing. And by doing so, of course, the beauty of their experience, perhaps the angst of their experience, or the hurt, or the technical insight, but whatever it is that you're trying to dig and drum up, it becomes far more possible in a story space than it does when we're just working in a linear or logical didactic kind of way. I love this picture of the butterfly, of course, because what we're saying visually here is that, like a caterpillar, when people come out of their cocoons and share their stories, it's transformational. It's metamorphosis. New things can emerge that were not possible before. So look for ways that you can either share a story or elicit story to validate emotions of the group. Strategy number 6, tell a story to change a group's perspective. What you're looking at here in the lower left-hand corner is actually drops of water falling into a larger body of water. And see all the circles, all these circles all over the place as the drops collide with one another and create rippling effects. Well, those are like the stories that are going on in your event, and the experiences being shared by people. Your job is to try to help with the change in perspective. Through those stories, through all those clashing experiences and noises, can you help people to create a calm body of water, a body of water where not everybody's thinking the same thing or taking away the same message, but that people are able to actually shift and see the sun shining through? Or if you were the golf ball, maybe looking down the pole of a golf hole, or vice versa. So stories are great for helping a group to change its perspective. And lastly, strategy number 7, use a joke or tangent. I love the microphone. You know, it's true. Sometimes our job is to be a little entertaining. My wife always tells me that I'm really not a funny guy. Should I try to tell you a joke right now? All right. Why did the lady walk outdoors with her purse open? Well, she was expecting some change in the weather. Okay, I know you're all laughing out there. Probably not. But what's great about a joke or even a tangent is that it creates a new energy. It creates a little epiphany. Jokes are, of course, brief little stories. And I think that sometimes, I like this picture of our farmer here. Sometimes we stumble along and we're not really paying attention to the group. We're kind of blind. So jokes are a great way to get people lighthearted, to sometimes realign a group, and also are an effective way of changing the energy of the group, similar to one of our earlier slides. Okay, let's take a minute, and I'd like to share with you some frequently asked questions and answer at least one of those before signing off on this webinar. So here are some things that people ask me all the time. They say, Terrence, how do you ever cover the content that you need to if people are telling stories all the time? Why don't you just crack out the marshmallows and the s'mores and the campfire? I mean, is it really appropriate for people in a training event to be telling stories? And what if I'm trying to get through a lot of policies or procedures or technical information? I mean, are stories even relevant there? Well, stories are relevant no matter what the topic is, and I've done training that's been very, very technical in nature, and training which has been, of course, more facilitative in nature. Let me tell you the bad news, and then I'll tell you the good news. The bad news is that stories will take more time. They will often make it more difficult to cover all of the material that you need to. Now, here's what I suggest. If you have a tremendous amount of material and you still want to use stories, you need to architect the learning event so that the stories are being told more in dyads or in small groups. So you're going to use different group processes. If you have a large group or if you have a lot of material to cover, trying to elicit a lot of stories in a large group process will eat up time. Now, that being said, I will often model how to tell stories in a short and succinct fashion, and I'll also set some ground rules around telling stories in a shorter format if I still want to work with a group at large. So that's the bad news, is that it can definitely be a challenge. I don't want to pretend that that's not an issue when you start opening up this story space. The good news is, with stories, less is more. In other words, there have been times where I have thrown out the content that I was supposed to cover because the content is organized by great instructional designers. However, it's linear by and large most of the time. It's didactic and it's linear in nature. When I'm working with people's stories, it's nonlinear, and therefore there's a lot more information packed in the stories. I can get through a tremendous amount of information just by working with the stories. So I can cover a lot of material, but it's just in a different manner. And I have been guilty, depending on the circumstances, of throwing out material because what was happening in the story space and people's experiences was far more important than just getting to another 15 slides and covering the material. I'm afraid that today that is all we'll be able to cover. I'd like to encourage you to visit my website, www.makingstories.net. Also, please, since this is a recorded webinar, please go and send me your questions. I'd be happy to answer them. I may not be able to respond in a long, drawn-out answer, but I'd at least like to hear what your questions are and share with you whatever I can. Also, feel free to give me a call, 415-948-8087. Thanks for attending, and take good care, and hope to see you on a webinar soon.